On the highest point, overlooking Gull Lake in southwestern Michigan, 110 feet above the water, stands a Tudor palace of 15,000 square feet. Its builder, one of the wealthiest men in America, called it simply the cottage. The man who built this estate spent the first 46 years of his life as a servant. He worked 120-hour weeks for minimal pay. He took dictation while his employer sat on the toilet. He ran alongside his boss's bicycle, notebook in hand, ready to record any passing thought. That employer was his own brother. In 1906, everything changed. The servant became a titan of industry. The invisible bookkeeper built a company that would put his signature on breakfast tables across America and around the world. By the time he constructed this lakeside palace in 1925, W.K. Kellogg had become a household name. His brother, the famous doctor who had once treated presidents and titans of industry, was suing him for the right to use their shared family name. The two brothers would fight in court for years. They would barely speak for decades. And in the final days of the older brother's life, a letter of reconciliation would arrive at this very house. W.K. Kellogg never opened it, not until it was too late. This is the story of cornflakes, family betrayal, and the price of success. And if you enjoy these deep dives into old money history, press the join button below and become a channel member. It really helps us keep making these documentaries. All right, let's get into it. It begins here, at the cottage by the lake. Chapter 1. Gull Lake. In 1925, W.K. Kellogg was 65 years old and finally rich beyond imagination. His cornflakes company was producing 120,000 boxes every single day. After a lifetime of poverty and servitude, he decided to build something for himself. He chose a spot 15 miles from Battle Creek at Gull Lake. The property sat on the highest elevation overlooking the water, covering 32 acres with 1,600 feet of private shoreline. Kellogg hired the architectural firm Benjamin & Benjamin from Grand Rapids to design his retreat. He wanted something that looked like it had stood for centuries. The architects delivered a neo-Tudor masterpiece. The exterior featured authentic, half-timbered walls with stucco panels, exactly as one would find on a manor house in the English countryside. Leaded glass windows with heraldic shields caught the morning light from the lake. The roof was clad in Ludowici tiles, imported and expensive, and topped with terracotta chimney finials that gave the silhouette a distinctly old-world character. But Kellogg was not content with the house alone. He transformed the entire property into a gentleman's estate. A Dutch windmill rose from the grounds, purely decorative but perfectly authentic in its details. Nearby stood a greenhouse where roses, citrus fruits, and flowers grew year-round, supplying fresh bouquets for the manor house daily. Down by the water sat a boathouse, and elsewhere on the property, a pagoda added an unexpected oriental accent to the English landscape. Kellogg was impatient. When the landscaper suggested planting young trees that would mature beautifully over time, he refused. "At my age," he told them, "you can't wait for trees to grow." He ordered fully mature trees transplanted onto the property instead. He wanted his paradise complete, and he wanted it now. The man who built this estate had spent decades watching others enjoy the fruits of his labor. His brother had lived in comfort while W.K. balanced the books. Now, finally, he had something of his own. He called it the cottage. The name was either extreme modesty or a private joke. Perhaps it was both. The 15,000 square foot Tudor palace with its windmill, greenhouse, and boathouse was to a man who had grown up with nothing and expected nothing, simply a cottage by the lake. But to understand how W.K. Kellogg came to build this place, we must go back to where it all began. We must return to Battle Creek and to the two brothers whose bond would shape American breakfast and whose hatred would last a lifetime. Chapter 2. The Brothers from Battle Creek. Battle Creek, Michigan in the 1860s was no ordinary American town. While the rest of the nation recovered from civil war and chased industrial fortunes, this small city in the southwestern corner of the state had become the spiritual headquarters of a religious movement convinced that the world was about to end. The Seventh-day Adventists had gathered here by the thousands. They believed the second coming of Christ was imminent. They rejected meat, alcohol, tobacco, coffee, and tea. They observed the Sabbath on Saturday rather than Sunday, and they believed that the human body was a temple that must be kept pure for the Lord's return. In this community, John Preston Kellogg made brooms and raised his family. John Preston and his wife, Annette, would have 16 children. 6 of them died from infectious diseases. The children who survived grew up in an atmosphere of religious devotion and constant anxiety about health, death, and divine judgment. John Harvey Kellogg arrived on February 26, 1852. He contracted tuberculosis as a child, and his left lung would remain largely useless for the rest of his life. But what he lacked in physical robustness, he made up for in intellect. The Adventist church leadership noticed him early. They saw potential and decided to invest in his education. 8 years later, on April 7, 1860, Will Keith Kellogg was born, the 7th of the 16 children. From the beginning, his path diverged sharply from his older brothers. Where John Harvey was celebrated, Will Keith was overlooked. Where John Harvey received sponsorship and opportunity, Will Keith received chores and low expectations. The problem was his eyes. Will Keith could barely see the blackboard at school. His teachers assumed he was slow. His family assumed he was dim. Nobody thought to check his vision. The boy who would one day build a business empire spent his childhood labeled as the family's disappointment. At 13, Will Keith dropped out of school. His father put him to work selling brooms door to door. The teenager learned how to pitch products to skeptical housewives, how to handle rejection, how to calculate margins, and how to manage inventory. His brother was headed to medical school. He was selling brooms. John Harvey's trajectory could not have been more different. The church sent him to study at the Hygio Therapeutic College in New Jersey, then to the University of Michigan Medical School, and finally to Bellevue Hospital Medical College in New York City. He returned to Battle Creek in 1876 as a fully credentialed physician at just 24 years old, ready to take charge of the Adventist health institution that would make him famous. The Western Health Reform Institute had been founded a decade earlier to put Adventist health principles into practice, but it was struggling. The church elders needed someone with vision and medical credentials to transform it. John Harvey Kellogg was their man. He immediately renamed it the Battle Creek Medical Surgical Sanitarium. The word sanitarium was his own invention, a combination of sanitary and sanatorium. The San, as everyone came to call it, would become the most famous health resort in America. That same year, 16-year-old Will Keith Kellogg walked through the doors of his brother's institution. He was not there as a patient. He was there as an employee. John Harvey needed someone to keep the books, manage correspondence, and handle administrative details. Will Keith needed a job. The arrangement seemed natural. It would last 25 years. Chapter 3. The Sanitarium Madness. The doctor stood 5 feet 4 inches tall and dressed entirely in white. White suit, white shoes, white tie. On his shoulder sat a white cockatoo. Behind round spectacles, a pointed beard gave him a distinctive appearance that patients and staff never forgot. John Harvey Kellogg was the most famous physician in America. His Battle Creek Sanitarium had grown from a struggling Adventist clinic into a massive campus covering 30 acres with more than 30 buildings. The main structure alone could house 1,300 patients. Between 800 and 1,000 employees kept the operation running, including 30 physicians on staff. The people who filled those rooms were not ordinary patients. Presidents William Howard Taft, Warren G. Harding, and Calvin Coolidge all came to Battle Creek seeking restoration. Thomas Edison arrived when his mind needed rest. Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone escaped the pressures of business within these walls. Amelia Earhart prepared for her historic flights here. John D. Rockefeller Jr. sought refuge after the Ludlow massacre had stained his family's reputation. The sand had become the place where America's elite went to be cleansed. On February 18, 1902, at 3:48 in the morning, fire broke out in the main building. The flames spread rapidly. Staff roused 407 sleeping guests and evacuated them into the freezing Michigan night. Only one person died, an elderly man who went back inside for his belongings. The loss was estimated at $400,000, most of it uninsured. John Harvey Kellogg rebuilt on an even grander scale. The new sanitarium opened in May 1903, and in 1928 he added a 14-story tower designed in the Italian Renaissance style that dominated the Battle Creek skyline. Kellogg's philosophy of health began with digestion. He believed that 90% of all human disease originated in the stomach and intestines. The solution was simple: clean them out. He invented an enema machine capable of pumping 15 quarts of water through a patient's bowels in a single minute. Patients received multiple enemas daily. Kellogg himself took one every morning and another at midday. Water alone was not enough. Kellogg believed the intestines needed to be colonized with beneficial bacteria. His solution was yogurt administered from both ends. Patients consumed half a pint by mouth. The other half was pumped directly into the rectum. The procedure was meant to establish healthy flora throughout the entire digestive tract. For patients who needed additional stimulation, there was the vibrating chair, a wooden seat that shook the body at up to 60 oscillations per second. The violent trembling was designed to promote bowel movements and often succeeded immediately and involuntarily. Light therapy cabinets bathed patients in the glow of dozens of electric bulbs. Sinusoidal machines sent mild electrical currents through their bodies. Mechanical horses provided exercise for those too weak to ride real ones. President Coolidge enjoyed his sanitarium horse so much that he had one installed in the White House. But John Harvey Kellogg's deepest obsession was not the bowels. It was sex. He married Ella Eaton in 1879. The marriage was never consummated. The couple maintained separate bedrooms for their entire lives together. Instead of biological children, they fostered 42 orphans over the years and legally adopted 8. Kellogg wrote extensively about what he called the solitary vice. Masturbation, he warned, caused poor posture, acne, weak vision, heart palpitations, epilepsy, and insanity. His recommended preventions were extreme. For boys, he advocated circumcision performed deliberately without anesthesia, believing the pain would create a beneficial association in the child's mind. In severe cases, he recommended suturing the foreskin shut to make erections impossible. For girls, he prescribed the application of carbolic acid directly to the clitoris. These were not fringe ideas hidden from public view. Kellogg published them in best-selling books and lectured on them to packed auditoriums. The Sands' entire dietary program was designed partly to suppress sexual desire. Heavy, flavorful foods were thought to inflame the passions. Bland, simple fare would keep the body calm and the urges dormant. This philosophy would lead directly to the invention of cornflakes. Chapter 5. The Liberation. In 1884, W.K. Kellogg wrote in his diary, "I feel kind of blue. I am afraid that I will always be a poor man the way things look now." He was 24 years old and had already worked for his brother for 8 years, a situation that would continue for another 22. The daily routine was humiliating. W.K. arrived before dawn and rarely left before midnight. He managed the books, handled correspondence, scheduled appointments, ordered supplies, and supervised staff, working nearly 120 hours a week. His salary was minimal, but the work itself was not the worst part. The worst part was how his brother treated him. John Harvey Kellogg expected his younger brother to be available at all times and in all circumstances. When John Harvey rode his bicycle around the sanitarium grounds, W.K. had to run alongside, ready to write down whatever thoughts crossed the doctor's mind. When John Harvey used the toilet, W.K. stood nearby with pen and paper, taking dictation. The great physician could not waste a single moment. Even in the bathroom, W.K. was required to address his own brother as Dr. Kellogg. Never John, never brother. Always the formal title. Always the reminder of who was master and who was servant. For 25 years, WK accepted this arrangement. He had no education beyond bookkeeping, no capital, and no connections outside Battle Creek. Where else could he go? Then came 1906. WK had watched C.W. Post become a millionaire selling products based on ideas from the sanitarium. He had seen dozens of cereal companies spring up in Battle Creek, all profiting from the health food craze. At 46 years old, he had spent his entire adult life making other people rich. On February 19, 1906, W.K. Kellogg founded the Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company. He bought out his brother's interest in the cereal business, and for the first time in his life, he was his own man. John Harvey barely noticed. The sanitarium was thriving, and cereal was merely a sideline, a dietary tool rather than a business opportunity. He let his younger brother have the cornflakes and returned to what he saw as his real work, reforming American health. W.K., however, understood something his brother never would. Americans did not want medicine for breakfast. They wanted something that tasted good. He added more sugar to the recipe and added salt. John Harvey would have been appalled, but John Harvey was no longer in charge. WK then did something radical. He took 1/3 of his startup capital and spent it on a single advertisement in Ladies' Home Journal. The ad invited housewives to wink at your grocer and see what you get. Grocers who received a wink were instructed to hand over a free sample box of Kellogg's cornflakes. The campaign was a sensation. In New York City alone, sales increased 15-fold. WK followed up with more advertising, more promotions, and more free samples. He understood that in the new century, the product that shouted loudest would win. He also added something to every box that his brother could never have: his signature. W.K. Kellogg signed his name on the front of the package, a personal guarantee of quality. That signature remains on Kellogg's cereal boxes to this day. John Harvey watched his younger brother's success with growing irritation. In 1908, he launched his own cereal company, selling products under the Kellogg name. The servant had become a competitor. The brothers, who had worked side by side for a quarter century, were now enemies. The war over the Kellogg name was about to begin. Chapter 6. The War Over the Name. Who owns a family name? When two brothers share the same surname and both want to sell products under that name, who has the right? By 1910, this question had become a legal battle. John Harvey Kellogg's cereal company was selling products labeled with the Kellogg name, and W.K. Kellogg's company was doing the same. Consumers were confused. Both brothers claimed to be the real Kellogg. W.K. filed suit to stop his brother from using their shared name on cereal products. The case was settled out of court, but the terms were unclear and the peace did not last. In 1916, the brothers were back in court. John Harvey had launched a product called Kellogg's Sterilized Bran, and W.K. responded with his own brand cereal. Each accused the other of trading on his reputation. The case went to the Michigan Supreme Court and lasted an entire month. Witnesses testified about the history of the sanitarium, the invention of cornflakes, and the meaning of the Kellogg name in American commerce. The central question was simple. When ordinary Americans heard the word Kellogg on a cereal box, who did they think of? John Harvey Kellogg took the stand. He was a world-famous physician whose books had been translated into many languages. He had treated presidents, titans of industry, and celebrities. For 40 years, the name Kellogg had meant health, wellness, and medical authority. He argued that he was the original Kellogg and that his younger brother was merely a businessman trading on the family reputation. W.K. Kellogg presented a different case. He had spent millions of dollars advertising Kellogg's cornflakes. His signature appeared on every box, and his company had made the Kellogg name famous in grocery stores across America. When a housewife reached for a box of Kellogg's cereal, she was not thinking of a doctor in Battle Creek. She was thinking of the product W.K. had built. In December 1920, the Michigan Supreme Court delivered its verdict. W.K. Kellogg won completely. He was granted exclusive rights to use the Kellogg name on cereal products, and John Harvey was ordered to pay back all the profits his cereal company had earned over the previous decade. The legal victory was total, but the personal cost was permanent. After the ruling, the brothers rarely spoke. When business required them to meet, W.K. insisted that a third party be present. He would not be alone in a room with his brother. The decades of condescension, the years of being treated as a servant, and the fight over credit for cornflakes had left scars that could not be healed. WK had won in court, but he could not forgive. John Harvey continued to run the sanitarium, and WK continued to build his cereal empire. They lived in the same small city, their names appearing on products across America, yet they existed in separate worlds. Chapter 7. Life at the Manor. As a boy, W.K. Kellogg once reflected late in life he never learned to play. Looking back on a childhood without games, without leisure, without joy, he blamed his strict Seventh-day Adventist upbringing, which left no room for frivolity, and his years spent serving his older brother, which left no time at all. Now, at 65, he had built a palace where play might finally be possible. He did not move there alone. In 1918, 6 years after his first wife Ella died, W.K. married Dr. Carrie Staines, a physician who had worked at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. In 1926, the couple moved into the completed manor house at Gull Lake, which soon became a summer retreat for the extended Kellogg family. Grandchildren arrived for long visits, playing games in the billiard room while their grandfather watched. They explored the grounds, ran across the lawns, and splashed in the lake. W.K. had never experienced such things as a child. Now he could watch a new generation enjoy what he had missed. His own pleasures were quieter. He loved silent films and installed a projection system at the manor, hosting regular movie nights for family and guests. In the darkness of his private screening room, the man who had spent decades balancing ledgers could finally sit still and be entertained. Almost immediately after moving in, the Kelloggs deeded the property to the city of Battle Creek with a specific instruction: it should become a place where all of Battle Creek may forever play. The gift came with a condition. W.K. and Carrie retained a life lease, allowing them to remain in residence for as long as they lived. In 1927, W.K. established a bird sanctuary on the property as a refuge for Canada geese, then considered an endangered species. The sanctuary attracted migrating birds from across the continent. The man who had never learned to play had created a haven for wild creatures, but the manor's peaceful days did not last. When World War II came, the United States Coast Guard requisitioned the property. W.K. and Carrie were forced to leave their cottage by the lake. W.K. leased a smaller house about a mile down the road, while Carrie returned to her family in Fenwick, Michigan. In 1944, the Coast Guard departed, and the manor became a rehabilitation center serving wounded soldiers from Percy Jones Army Hospital in Battle Creek. The hospital occupied the old sanitarium building where W.K. had once worked as his brother's bookkeeper. Carrie Kellogg died in 1948 without ever returning to the manor. The military finally left in 1950, and the house stood empty for 18 months. On October 6, 1951, W.K. Kellogg died at the age of 91. The following year, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation transferred the estate to Michigan State University. It became the Kellogg Gull Lake Biological Station, used for research and education. The cottage by the lake had served many purposes: a gentleman's retreat, a family gathering place, a military installation, a rehabilitation center, and a research station. W.K. Kellogg built it to create the childhood he never had. In the end, it became something larger than one man's private paradise. Chapter 8. The Price. In 1913, W.K. Kellogg's grandson, Kenneth, fell from a window. The boy survived but suffered permanent disabilities and would require care for the rest of his life. Watching Kenneth struggle affected W.K. deeply, and this one tragedy would shape the rest of his legacy. 12 years later, W.K. faced another family crisis. His son, John Leonard, had worked for the company for 17 years. He invented the wax paper lining that kept cereal fresh inside the box, developed all bran, and held more than 200 patents. He was the heir apparent. In 1925, W.K. fired him. The reasons were personal, not professional. John Leonard had divorced his wife and married his secretary. He had also purchased an oatmeal business, which his father saw as a betrayal. W.K. could not tolerate disloyalty. He cut his son out of the company and out of his life. Father and son never spoke again. In 1930, at the height of the Great Depression, W.K. established the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Over his lifetime, he donated $66 million to the foundation, representing 54% of his Kellogg Company stock. The focus was simple: children's health, education, and welfare. Perhaps he was thinking of Kenneth when he made these gifts. The foundation funded the Kellogg School in Battle Creek, which pioneered inclusive education for disabled children. It built hospitals and clinics, trained nurses and doctors, and fed hungry children during the Depression when their parents had nothing. When asked about his philanthropy, W.K. rejected any suggestion of saintliness. "I am a selfish person and no philanthropist," he said. "I love to do things for children because I get a kick out of it." In 1937, doctors diagnosed W.K. with glaucoma. The disease progressed rapidly, and within a few years he was completely blind. He would spend the last decade of his life in darkness, but blindness did not stop him. He continued attending board meetings and still visited the factory floor, guided by German Shepherd dogs descended from the famous Rin Tin Tin line. When his directors recommended cutting the advertising budget during hard times, W.K. overruled them, ordering an increase of $1 million instead. He understood that a crisis was exactly when a company needed to fight for attention. Then came the final blow. After firing John Leonard, W.K. had turned to his grandson, John Jr., as the new successor. The young man joined the company and rose through the ranks, but the pressure proved too much. He was demoted and suffered a mental breakdown. In 1938, he took his own life. By the end, W.K. Kellogg's two surviving sons had broken off all contact with their father. The man who built a company that fed millions of American families had lost his own. The man once dismissed as dim-witted, who had worked so long in his brother's shadow, had built something that would outlast them both. But the cost had been terrible. His son refused to see him. His grandsons were dead or damaged. His brother remained an enemy. W.K. Kellogg had won everything and lost everyone. Chapter 9. The Letter. In 1943, John Harvey Kellogg was dying. He was 91 years old. His sanitarium had gone bankrupt a decade earlier, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church had expelled him back in 1907 over theological disputes. The great health reformer who had once treated presidents now faced his final days with little of the glory he had once enjoyed. He thought about his brother. 37 years had passed since W.K. had walked out of the sanitarium to start his own company. 23 years had passed since the court ruling that stripped John Harvey of the right to use his own name on cereal boxes. The brothers had barely spoken in all that time. Whenever they met, a third party had to be present at W.K.'s insistence. The hatred had calcified into something permanent. But death has a way of softening old grievances. John Harvey picked up a pen and wrote a letter to his younger brother. In it, he admitted what he had never acknowledged while he was healthy and powerful. He had treated W.K. badly. He had taken him for granted. He had failed to recognize his contributions. He was sorry. The letter arrived at W.K.'s home. W.K. was 83 years old and completely blind. Someone would have had to read the letter aloud to him. He chose not to have it read. The envelope sat unopened. On December 14, 1943, John Harvey Kellogg died of bronchitis. He was 91. Only after his brother was dead did W.K. finally have the letter read to him. What he felt in that moment, no one recorded. Regret perhaps, or satisfaction that his brother had finally acknowledged the truth, or simply the hollow realization that reconciliation was no longer possible. The two men who had invented cornflakes together, who had built and destroyed their relationship over 6 decades, would never speak again. W.K. lived 8 more years. He continued his work with the foundation. He remained involved with the company he had built. The blind old man still showed up, still made decisions, still cared about the empire that bore his name. When death finally came for W.K. Kellogg, it came quietly. The man who had started with nothing, who had revolutionized American breakfast, who had given away $66 million to help children, slipped away at his home. He was the same age his brother had been, 91. The letter had come too late, but perhaps it would not have mattered if it had come earlier. Some wounds cannot be healed with words. WK had spent a quarter-century being humiliated by his brother. No apology, however sincere, could erase that. The brothers were bound together by blood, by invention, by hatred, and, finally, by death. Oak Hill Cemetery sits on a gentle slope in Battle Creek, Michigan. Among its graves lie Sojourner Truth, the abolitionist and women's rights activist, and C.W. Post, the serial pioneer who made his fortune from ideas he learned at the sanitarium. And here, side by side, rest the Kellogg brothers. John Harvey Kellogg died in 1943. W.K. Kellogg followed 8 years later. In death, they lie closer than they ever allowed themselves to be in their final decades of life. 2 headstones, 2 names, 1 family torn apart by ambition and pride. The sanitarium where it all began no longer exists as John Harvey knew it. The grand building became a military hospital during the World War II, then a federal center. The patients stopped coming long ago. The enemas and vibrating chairs and yogurt treatments are remembered now only as curiosities from a stranger era of American medicine. But the cottage by the lake still stands. The Tudor Manor at Gull Lake, where W.K. Kellogg watched his grandchildren play and screened silent films in the evenings, has been preserved. Students and researchers from Michigan State University walk the grounds where the serial king once planted fully grown trees because he could not wait for saplings to mature. And the signature endures. Every morning, in kitchens across America and around the world, people reach for boxes bearing the name W.K. Kellogg wrote over a century ago. They pour corn flakes into bowls without thinking about the brothers who invented them, the decades of humiliation that preceded them, or the family that was destroyed in their wake. W.K. Kellogg once wrote in his diary that he feared he would always be a poor man. He was wrong about that. He became one of the wealthiest men in America. He gave away $66 million to help children he would never meet. He built a company that still feeds millions. But he was right about something else. As a boy, he never learned to play. And as a man, he never learned to forgive. The letter from his dying brother sat unopened until it was too late. The reconciliation never came. The brothers are together now in the Michigan earth, their graves just feet apart. The war over the Kellogg name is finally over.